So very good afternoon to all of you. Thank you all for joining in. Amit, Bhaumik, Chetan, Dwani, Jalpa, Kalpesh, Mauli, Neetu, Rashi, Tushar, Ushma, Ankit, Pranav, Sandeep. Thank you all for joining in today. Good afternoon, Bhavik. Good afternoon, Ushma. Good afternoon, Kalpesh. Well, it's time to begin with our today's session. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'll lift you and you'll lift me, and we'll both ascend together. This is a beautiful quote that I came across by John Greenleaf Whittier. A servant leader shares power, puts the need of the employee first, and helps people develop and perform as highly as possible. Instead of the people working to serve the leader exists to serve the people. The importance of empathy as an emotional and social intelligence competency for servant leaders. Increasingly, companies are recognizing this leadership form to demonstrate high emotional and social intelligence competencies are crucial to their organization's effectiveness. How can an effective HR leader use this form effectively? Let's hear it from our expert today. HR Association of India welcomes you all to the 2021 Dialogue Masterclass series on the topic Servant Leadership. To know more about HRAI and its event, I would request all our participants to visit the link and details posted in the chat window. Request all the participants to kindly follow the webinar guidelines mentioned in the chat window. It would be great to have all the participants' feedback. We will be running a poll. We will be running a poll before the Q&A session. Request all the participants to kindly give your feedback on the session. I now take the privilege to introduce our esteemed speaker for today, Dr. Sheetal Bhatia, founder and CEO, Growth Catalyst. Dr. Sheetal is a leadership coach. He is an engineer by chance, management graduate by experiment, and PhD holder by choice. Under the guidance of Dr. D.M. Pistonji, retired professor, IIM Ahmedabad, he went on to obtain his certification as a leadership coach from IIM Bangalore. With an experience of more than a decade in leadership, he works for three segments: SME ranging below 50 crore, family business between 50 to 500 crore, and MNC above 500 crore of annual turnover. He has worked with companies like L&T, Ford Motors, Jubilant Life Science, Kalpataru Power Transmission, Jindal Saw, Gujarat Gas, Astral Pipes, Syntex, Vermora, to name a few. He works as a leadership coach to senior management executives to help them be better leaders so they can lead their organization successfully. You can follow him on LinkedIn. The link for the same has been shared in the chat window. I now hand over the platform to Dr. Sheetal. Over to you, Doc.
Thank you, Peter. I hope you can hear me properly.
Yes, we can, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, HRAI, to make me part of this seminar. And as the title says, it's a dialogue. So I'd prefer to have dialogue than a monologue. And as we know that, since last April, since lockdown started, our ability to be in front of the screen has drastically gone down in last 3-4 months. So instead of making the entire session monologue after a few points of sharing, I'd be happy to take more questions and answer them individually one after another. So this is very, thanks for the nice introduction. And leadership is something that I would say that it's a way of life for me. And servant leadership, if we go by the word servant leadership, a literary meaning, actually it's an oxymoron. What is oxymoron? The two different words going together, they do not go together, like dark light or alone together or open secret or random order. So when we talk about servant leadership, leadership and servant actually do not go together. How can be a leader servant? But uh, somewhere in 80s, Greenleaf coined this word with a philosophical approach of, he mentioned that leader is there to serve first and then to lead. With this philosophy, he coined the call servant leadership. Maybe since we are from India, the term is quite familiar with us since more than 5,000 years old. If you talk about Lord Krishna or Gautam Buddha, the philosophy they talk about nothing but a servant leadership, probably with a different context and content. But if we try to understand this phenomena with respect to leadership, uh, this is still relevant for us in this era of life as well. To make it more simple, usually I talk about 7V of leadership. What is this 7V of leadership? The first V, I would say that Vichar. This applies to any kind of leader, whether you are an executive or you are a chairman of any organization. The first V stands for Vichar. Then comes Vani. Then comes Vartan, Vyavhar, Vyapar, Vruddhi, and Vyavastha. So when you talk about this 7V, the servant leadership concepts focus on the first V, which is Vichar. And Vichar is something like you what we say mindset, thought governance. And then comes about the communication skill and different leadership style or different leadership attributes. And then of course you talk about organization leadership. So when Greenleaf coined this word, he meant to say that it's not about the functional promise a leaders are supposed to perform in the organization, but it's a philosophical approach that they need to establish in the organization. And that's where we talk about the culture of developing leadership in the organization. So this concept of servant leadership puts you from a very a narrow meaning of leadership from which is individual centric approach to the larger perspective of not only small v, but usually we denote that capital V. So which includes maybe a team, maybe a department, maybe an organization, or maybe the stakeholder at large, and maybe the the world that we operate in. If we look at and as everybody knows that since last 1 year the world has gone upside down. We often talk about globalization, and probably globalization has become the biggest threat. People try to people have gone to villages, people have gone to the area which is more in isolation, and they have been enjoying their life. Very large company, they are still operating work from home, and that's because we believe that this is a need of an hour. So that this is the best time for any kind of leadership to flourish, and with that servant leadership comes at the center. So to explain this concept, let me give you few examples, live examples without quoting their name and companies because of the confidentiality in nature. There was a precedent. There was a precedent in a Gujarat-based organization where the export went down drastically, and the company, which was exporting more than 100 crores of values to different countries, and last 1 year the company suffered a huge loss because of that. President had two different choices. One, he could always say that, no, I would switch over to the next company where there's a healthy environment and I can contribute to what I'm doing. On the other side, he had an opportunity to be with the company and ensure that the the entire team, the company had almost 30 people working in export division, and ensuring that, okay, I will be there with you, and whatever happens to me, I ensure that I take care of you. So he took a decision of being with the company, and now after almost 9, 10 months, the company has gone to revival phase, yet to recover fully, but with the same leadership at the top for the export department, they have recovered. They have managed to maintain the client relationship, and the overall mindset of the team export division is healthy now. This is a prime example of servant leadership, where a leader decides that, okay, I'm here to serve to my team, I'm here to serve my organization, however the good or bad the situation may be outside, but I am with my company. So that's the first example. Second example, I would like to quote, I have quoted this example at many a places. There used to be a person, a teacher in Saurashtra region, who decided that I would like to start my company, a cloak manufacturing company. He invited ladies across the region, taught them how to assemble watch, clock, and made one of the largest clock manufacturing company in the world. So his purpose was not at all to make money. Of course, when you do business, you focus on the business dynamics, you focus on the profitability, you focus on the top line, bottom line, etc. But his focus was to upliftment of the society through women empowerment, helping them to manage the finances at home, and helping them to manage the entire family for the next generation to come. So that's where I would say that this is another very good example of servant leadership. So third example, again, I would like to give, was a very small manager who ensured well-being of the team by reaching out to family in this challenging environment, ensuring their daily needs being taken care of. He managed all the financial requirements of all the team members, be there whenever there is a need. So this is again, irrespective of you are performing a role of chairman or a president or divisional head, or maybe you may be a manager leading four executives under you. You can demonstrate servant leadership. The premise of the servant leadership is not to fulfill what is my needs at individual level, but learning what's the need of the people that I am serving to. So servant leadership keep a leader in the center to serve. So it's, when you think of the pyramid, you actually up topple the pyramid upside down, where your needs come at the last and the needs of the others, the society or the organization, comes at the top. One more example which I would like to talk about is which is quite interesting and important, of the case of Mahabharata, and especially the context of Bhagavad Gita. We often say that, what, Arjuna was a functional expert. He knew the nitty gritty of archery, but his problem was not a functional problem. What Krishna taught was to connect him with the larger role of being in the battlefield, and what is the role of the Kshatriya when a person is in the battlefield. So similarly, when a person is performing a role of leader, the servant leadership puts the context of being in the center and looking at the larger purpose. Just imagine that, Krishna directing Arjuna to wage a war in front of the people who were familiar to him. So that was again the premise of servant leadership. serve the purpose of being a Kshatriya, serve the purpose of being in the battlefield, and serve the purpose to reach to what is the larger right. It's not about right or wrong, but it's about right or being more right, right and being more appropriately right. So that's the beauty of servant leadership, which connects you to the larger purpose. So often we talk about, I talked about 7 V's of leadership, but servant leadership, when it works with the first premise of which are thoughts, mindset, and that it takes to the seventh V, which is Vruddhi, which I call organizational growth. So when you go for when you rise, another good example of John Maxwell, where he talked about level 5 leadership. Again, with context to that framework of leadership, servant leadership starts at the level 1 and makes a person to reach to the level 5 leadership context. So all this can, leading to the premise of servant leadership, where you are here to serve. Now, with this, I would like to go for the dialogue manner, wherein there are more questions being raised about, and then I try to answer them. Before, there are few as more examples to quote upon. So, Peter, can we make the next segment open to the participants who are taking their questions from?
Yeah, sure, sure. We can have our participants share their question uh, based on the session that we have had. You can definitely have that open up for questions. So you would want to go ahead and open up for questions from
Yes,
participants, or
please.
you would
So
want to take the segment?
let us make it more dialogue, as I said that in the earlier session.
Okay, okay. So request all our participants to kindly share your questions in the chat box. If anyone would like to speak up or put forward their questions, they can definitely unmute themselves and put across their question.
I have one question for them.
Okay, we got one question from Tushar. Should I put it across or?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
So, what are some of the disadvantages of servant leadership model? This is a question by Tushar.
In fact, yeah. So this is a very good and interesting question. Actually, there are no disadvantages of servant leadership if and only if you are there to serve yourself, then you cannot practice servant leadership, because there is something called personality, and personality is different than servant leadership model. If your personality is such that, or maybe you are at a basic levels of serving yourself in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and probably you may not think of practicing servant leadership. But the moment you practice servant leadership, you actually go to the level of self-actualization, wherein you start putting the next person or the purpose of your own existence. So there are no disadvantages of practicing servant leadership.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Sheetal. You were saying something, so do you want me to take other
Yeah,
questions?
so I have a question. Yeah, I have a question for many of them.
Hmm.
Often we talk about servant leadership, but we don't talk about the role of follower in case of servant leadership.
True, true.
So what people think of when actually people practice servant leadership? I have one more example to, I visited one setup in Bhavnagar. There is a live case of husband and wife. This is a true example of servant leadership. Both of them giving training of leadership to the children of underprivileged area. So they teach them what is the importance of education, what is the vocational training programs, and they actually make them perform in the prime life. So that is nothing but a servant leadership, example of servant leadership.
Great. So, Dr. Sheetal, we have one question from Vanita.
Yes, please.
How AI, ML, and automation going to impact the entire HR role? What kind of values this will add to effectiveness of HR function?
Uh, I would try to contextualize this question with respect to the subject of the session. When we talk about the role of HR and especially importance of automation in effectiveness of HR, um, again, relating to the philosophical aspects of the organization, the world so far, as we say that there was a time where we talking about the technology. There was a time where we talking about the globalization and bringing impact through the technology in our day-to-day life. Last 1 year, we have felt the value of the human life. Now, if this adds, the technology or the automation adds value to what we are doing as an HR people, certainly it's helpful. But if it's more mechanical or transactional in nature, so probably life is not going to be more healthy. So if the purpose is to add value as an HR people, yes, the technology always helps. So again, the context and the purpose will play more important role than the being just transactional in nature.
Thank you, Dr. Sheetal. We have a next question from Neha. What kind of skills and competencies should be very essential to make HR leaders future ready and compatible?
People connectivity has been primed to HR people and emotionally understanding the role of the people across various segments in the organization. So functional knowledge, of course, play its own role, but when it comes to the development, HR has always two aspects of a role in the organization. One, often we say that the administrative part of the HR, and the other is more transformational role in the organization. So for the transactional, you can relate with the functional knowledge, but as far as the transformational role is concerned, one needs to be really good empathetically, having emotional intelligence very high, and ability to connect with the people with the right kind of communication. So these are the few skills and competency a HR person needs to, because the role of the HR, let's say if I work in sales department or if I work in a manufacturing department, what I'm dealing is maybe the machines when I work in the production department. But when you work in HR department, you are not dealing with machines, you are dealing with live people, and you need to understand what kind of concerns they have, and your role is to solve their concern. So with that, maybe again, here servant leadership comes into picture because it's a philosophical approach. What role, and more importantly, last 10 years or maybe couple of decades, we talk about HR as a business partner. So HR needs to understand the business or the overall philosophy of the organization. So these are the few competency one which makes HR people more successful in the respective domains.
True. We have the next question that is from Karan, but Karan, we have this addressed when it comes to what are some of the disadvantages of servant leadership model. He has also further added to it saying, is there any dark side of servant leadership?
Not only servant leadership. If you talk, if see, I'm not talking about human being. I'm talking about leadership. there is no dark side of leadership. If you try to understand your role, if you try to perform your role, there's nothing like what has happened in last 1.5 year. It started with one place in the world. If just imagine that we can control it, can't we control it? But now, being human, uh, that went out of our control. And more importantly, on the earth, the damage that we have done as human being, no other creature in the world has done. So actually, there is no dark side of leadership. Yeah, there is dark side of human being, I would say that.
Absolutely. Um, we have another question that has come up. Does employee attitude has a significant impact on the implementation of the entire process of servant leadership that we are talking of? So, as you mentioned earlier, followers, correct? So, how and in what manner it would impact them when we talk about this entire servant leadership?
This is a beautiful question, and I would say that servant leadership may not be applied to an individual-centric leadership. Servant leadership should be applied to organization leadership. Now, organization leadership is different than individual leadership. We have seen organization working in the same domain. They operate with a different philosophy and the culture. And maybe the management at the top decides what kind of culture they want to build for the organization. The moment they start implementing all this philosophical approach across the organization, the concept of servant leadership goes from an individual centric approach to the organization centric approach. And that's where, I was referring to another research couple of months back. The research talked about on all the pass outs, all the graduate of IIMs, when they joined good companies, they flourished. But when they joined not so good companies, their own career came to the stake. So even if you are an IIM graduate, does not guarantee your success unless you are at a right location. So the concept of servant leadership, I would say that since we are addressing HR people, you need to put in into practice at the organizational level instead of individual level. So that makes more appropriate across the levels, whether a chairman or a divisional head or a manager or a functional manager or line manager, practicing the model of servant leadership with respect to the organization that you fit into. If we talk about McDonald's, they have a different philosophy. Again, if you go to any manufacturing company or engineering company, their definition of leadership gets changed. So philosophy remains same, but the application gets changed. I
True,
hope
true, Dr.
I've tried to answer that. Yeah.
Absolutely, Dr. Sheetal. In fact, I've also got another question that also talks about, we have seen this particular leadership trait, especially when we talk about serving the nation, or we talk about for a larger cause that one individual works towards. How an HR as an individual, when we talk about working in an organization and firm, can have that same impact where they definitely now look towards businesses. As we talk about, HR are poorly related to where we talk about, they are in line with what we look at the business aspects that needs to be met. So how they can apply the same form of leadership within the organization by taking the confidence of the management as well as the employees.
So first, let us acknowledge that the purpose of organization is to grow business, is to do business. And uh, now, how do you do makes your organization different than the next organization? Everybody would like to go. If I am 100 crore company, would try to become 120 crore company. If I am 500 crore company, would like to grow by another 200 crore. So a growth is a natural phenomenon. How do you grow? If I cut you short and then grow, probably I may not enjoy. But at the same time, uh, if I take a holistic approach in growth, I am trying to justify all my employees. Again, my policies, my structure, my systems are organization centric, and I'm not taking care of my employees. Probably I am not practicing this servant leadership. right? So one needs to be really holistic in applying this phenomenon, and that's where let me give you one more example. I I know one company. Their competitor went into very bad shape. There was a fire in their factory, and the competitor came to the person and asked for help. Now, if they would not help, the competitor would have gone. But they went out of the competition, creating win-win situation, helping the competitor in a very bad situation. And this is nothing but a servant leadership, considering the even competitor as a part of the larger extending the help, and are doing what
Sir, we lost you. Request all the participants to kindly be patient. We have Dr. Sheetal who has rejoined us. Request all our participants to kindly share questions in the chat box. We'll have them answered once Dr. Sheetal rejoins us. Dr. Sheetal, you will have to unmute yourself.
Yes, am I with you?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Yeah, pardon me for the technological glitch.
Yeah, so we lost you while you were explaining the last. Hello.
Yeah, so as I said that with that example, both the companies are doing wonderfully well. In fact, they have increased their market share collectively. So this is again a classical example, unusual classical example of servant leadership.
Beautifully explained, Dr. Sheetal, when it comes to a competitor taking over and supporting their fellow competitors.
Yeah.
Out there. Okay. Now we have another question from Neha. She mentioned that is servant leadership more of a trait or a behavior?
Neither trait nor behavior. It's an approach, I would say that, because behavior is something that you often demonstrate, but philosophical approach is something that you try to inculcate in your thought process, in your organization, in your culture. So instead of trait, you can relate to behavior in some extent, but it's a more philosophical approach. With that, you try to practice the concept of leadership and try to perform your role in the organization.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sheetal. We have another question from Karan Shah. He's asking, are these relationship between servant leadership, culture and performance?
Yes.
Are there any relationship between servant leadership, culture and performance?
Yes, certainly. Servant leadership can be inculcated in the culture of the organization, which can lead to a better performance. And of course, people where servant leadership being practiced you find more congenial, open, receptive to the creativity, more ideas, and they are like, when the river starts, if you analyze, when the river starts at the top, it makes more noise, but when it comes to a plain, it stands still. So servant leadership is more like a standstill approach than the quick fix approach. So it leads to the better performance.
Absolutely. And also to lead with an example.
Correct.
Uh, this takes us to our next question. That's from Mauli Shah. How servant leadership can help employees to motivate in day-to-day activities?
When you perform servant leadership, you actually need to less motivate people because you make them self-motivated. Um, Motivation is, of course, it goes by individual to individual, but at the same time, we call that internally and externally motivated people. So when you practice servant leadership, you are actually making people to internally motivated for. So you make them comfortable with respect to their roles. You make them comfortable with respect to the environment in the organization. Uh, the When there is a philosophy of servant leadership, people are more clear about their achievement areas. People are more clear about what is expected from them, and people actually put the barometer from the self-centric to the team centric and the organization centric and maybe customer centric. So uh, over a period of time, you feel that you, as an HR person or as a leader, you feel that your role is not to motivate in a transactional manner, but your role is to more facilitate. Your role is more to coach them. Your role is more to enhance what people have. So that's the impact on the motivation by servant leadership.
So motivation is one thing which they need to imbibe in themselves, whereas the leaders felicitate them with the aspects that will enable them to perform those tasks. Beautifully answered, Dr. Sheetal. I would also have like one question that had come up. Where would you rate this particular skill of leadership compared to the other leadership skills?
So classically, if you study the various theories which has come up in the area of leadership, it started with the trait theory of leadership, where we say that there are certain traits which makes a leadership successful. It was not the case when we talked about the behavioral model of leadership style, and then we talked about transactional leadership, transformational leadership, laissez-faire leadership, and charismatic leadership. And there later on we also talked about the situational theory of leadership. So there are no unique formula to leadership where it's success. Leaders do fail. It's not that leaders always deal with the success, but leaders do fail. They fail drastically. They fail tremendously. If you talk about any cricket match, one team will always win and one team will always lose. But what do you do after that instance will make you a different kind of leader? Uh, if I give you one more example to relate with, so, with context to the cricket, South African cricket team has never won very big series or a World Cup. Now, if you analyze the team on paper, you will find that they have the best of the best players, whether it is batsman or bowler, at a specific time, but they could not win. The missing component was the culture. If I join as a youngster in South African cricket team, I feel the pressure when there is a critical match coming in place, and then I have seen senior losing them, and then I become a part of the losing team as well. And that's probably the importance of the culture. At since the HR, when we are addressing HR people, they can relate with. Uh, there is something called a concept of culture of high performance. You need to make people learn how to win. Now, to how to perform and how to win, there is a slightly gap, and that's where the we find people with little higher age more prone to winning than the losing.
True, true. Beautifully explained, Dr. Sheetal. When we are talking about these all traits of leadership, uh, since we have many HR professionals out here on our today's webinar, uh, which of these leadership traits or I would say skills or format that would help most of these HR professionals to succeed in their entire career or in their organization?
I would say, yeah, I would say that connect with the purpose, connect with the purpose of the organization. If you understand what is your role in the organization, you are better placed than merely functioning your day-to-day activity. Of course, you need to focus on the execution excellence, but at the same time, you need to understand. See, irrespective of the size and scale of the company, the industry itself gives you an opportunity to grow. Uh, uh, if you grab it, then you can grow. Like every 10 years, there comes an opportunity which was not there in the previous decade. So to be with, one needs to upgrade oneself for. Now this is something that, the organization which learns the way you and me as an individual we learn, the organization do learn. And specifically in with context with the availability of information. Now these days children prefer to the challenge is that, the children know more than what their teachers know. Teachers, while they were growing, they didn't have all these resources. Now all these children have more resources than the teachers. So all contextualization, upgradation is all the time important.
True, true. Absolutely. So before we take up other questions that are coming up, we'll be running a poll. Would request all our participants to share their feedback on our today's session. Post that is what we will take up the rest question. I would also request all the participants to kindly share the questions pertaining to our today's session in the chat box. Once again, I thank all our participants for joining our session today. We have received a lot of inquiry about the e-certificate offered by HRAI. You can claim your certificate by sharing your details. When I say details, your full name and session attended by you all in an email to the email ID provided in the chat window. We will email the e-certificate to you based on details we receive. Also, any of our participants, if they intend to ask their questions directly, they can unmute themselves and speak out here.
So Peter, I have a couple of more points to add also.
Yes, please, sir.
Once you are through with the poll, just inform me. I will share a couple of.
Yes, sir, we are done with. You can proceed ahead.
Good. So, we talk about servant leadership, and as I said earlier, also it's an oxymoron.
True.
When we talk about followership, we don't use the word called servant leadership, and this is the entire beauty of the game. Even Greenleaf explained this, because when we talk about servant followership, your perceived mind says that a follower is there to serve, but that's not what we try to expect from follower. The dignity of follower is not to make them to feel that they are here to serve, but whom are we making somebody responsible to serve? It's the leader, not the follower. And that's where when he explained in his notes that when I'm writing servant leadership, I'm not writing against the follower, but I'm writing against the leader.
Got it. Got it.
Any further question that you have?
So would request all our participants to share your questions pertaining to our today's session in the chat box. Well, I don't see any questions coming up. Thank you, Doc, for such an insightful and enlightening session on the art of servant leadership. It has been a pleasure being with you today. I'm sure our participants have had a lot to learn and take away from this session. Before we conclude with our today's session, we would also want to thank the association members, Geisha, NASCOM COE, LinkedIn Local, Talgrow, TLE, and GlipTalk for supporting these HRAI events. To know more about these associations, request you to kindly visit the link provided in the chat window. Thank you once again, dear speaker and our participants, for joining us today. Do join us for our next masterclass tomorrow on Alice in Wonderland, Storytelling Mystics, a session by Ms. Harini Srinivasan, partner Simcoe Style, on the 24th of March 2021. I request you to kindly register for this event at the link mentioned in the chat window. Also to join the Dialogue 2021 WhatsApp chat group through the invite link shared in the chat window. That's it from us today. See you soon. Stay safe, take care, and bye for now.
Bye-bye, Peter.
Bye. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Shyam. We hereby conclude with our today's session.